Hey everybody, it's Bari Norman from Expert Admissions. We're talking about recommendation letters and supplemental materials today. Let's start with recommendations. So in terms of who you want to ask, first you have to know what's required for each school. It's going to be a mixed bag. The school report is another name for counselor recommendation. I would say at most colleges, a school report and counselor recommendation are required. And then you'll either see anything from counselor or teacher, just the counselor, a counselor and one teacher, a counselor and two teachers. It's never going to be more than a counselor and two teachers. Maybe if you're applying to some super specialized program, there may be something additional, but let's put those things aside. So you've got your requirements, and then you have to decide who to ask. A common question I get is, do you have to ask somebody from English, history, social science, and then somebody else from math or science? Like, you have to kind of separate it out and have people from kind of very different disciplines. If you could get two spectacular recommendations from teachers in two really different disciplines, sure, go for it if you have two required teacher recommendations, but I wouldn't do that at the expense of quality. So if you're going to get two spectacular recommendations, if you ask one English teacher and one history teacher, but if you ask math or science or foreign language, you would get sort of a standard good one, but nothing special, I wouldn't do that. But if all was equal, sure, why don't you show your range? But the most important thing is to pick people who have the best things to say about you as a student in the classroom. And that's exactly what a teacher recommendation is. So they're speaking about you as a student in the classroom. It's not about you as a person per se. It's not about how great you are, as a community member in your school. Your counselor will talk about that actually, but a teacher is really supposed to focus on the academics. So don't give them your whole resume so they can recap it. They're not supposed to be writing about that. They're supposed to be writing about their everyday classroom experience with you. Then your counselor is your counselor at school. If you're at a school where you either don't have a counselor or you don't have a particularly close relationship with a counselor, it's okay actually if a principal or assistant principal, or if you have an advisor that's different from your college counselor, those people also can write, though there's probably going to be some kind of format and policy on who writes that counselor recommendation at your school. But there actually is a little bit of flexibility if you need it. And then there's supplemental recommendations. In addition to the ones that are required, you may submit one or two additional recommendations. Also, look in the requirements and see what exactly each college you're applying to, what they allow. If a college allows up to two supplemental recommendations, that does not mean they want to. It doesn't mean they want any. It just means they absolutely will not accept more than that. If you're thinking about supplemental recommendations, make sure whoever you ask that they're going to add something additional. So on top of whoever else is recommending you, counselor, one or two teachers, going to add something different from them and something that's relevant to this process. And so if you're just going to get kind of another kind of character sort of assessment, or like what we would call a standard strong recommendation saying you were a good worker and, you showed up on time and you're a really great person and you are a great addition to the team, I would think twice about whether or not that's absolutely necessary. But if you had a really, really spectacular experience somewhere or a really special experience somewhere, and they can speak to an aspect of you that your teachers and counselors in school can't, then absolutely go for it. Who might you ask? You can ask a coach, you can ask a supervisor from a job or an internship or an activity or a club. So there's all different people you would potentially ask. And there are even some colleges, and it's an increasing number, although still very small, that require or ask for a peer recommendation, which is asking somebody closer to your age. They can be related or not related to you, but the idea is that they're hearing from a lot of adults. They'd like to hear from a student or somebody closer to your age. And there are a very small number of places that even actually, believe it or not, ask for a parent letter. But again, just a couple of places that I can think of for that. But that's the deal with recommendations. So think about who you want to ask in the first place, and then think about whether or not you really need to ask a supplemental recommender, because we never want to just add stuff to a file. College admissions officers have a ton to read. They don't have a lot of time. They've asked for what they need and what they want. And so if you're going to give them something extra, it better be worth their time. As far as supplemental materials go, we would say the same thing. Only add things that are going to give additional relevant information on top of what you've already given them in the main application and supplement. So things that come up that students might think about submitting, a URL to a blog or an Instagram or an online portfolio for art or photography, things like that. Remember that admissions officers are generalists, so they can't sit there and really know the nuances of good art and great art. I know if something's not bad, but the different levels of really good are beyond me, and the same for any admissions officer. At some colleges, they will send things like that over to faculty members just to let them know how good is this. And you're not applying to a portfolio or audition-based program. It's not going to be what gets you in, but if faculty members say this is actually truly exceptional, then that would elevate your extracurricular activity of art or photography or whatever to a level, even higher than is typical of a high achieving student, let's say, or any student. So that's something to think about, but don't just add it for any reason. There's a saying in admissions, the thicker the file, the thicker the kid. And that means, the more a student kind of piles on, the more they're trying to divert your eyes away from something that you actually care about, like the transcript or scores or even level of engagement in other activities or whatever. So if you're going to include additional information and make an admissions officer take additional time on your application, just make sure that it's worth it. And most importantly, make sure that you're doing your job as an applicant in the main part of the application and in the supplement, in all the things that are required. So make sure you're doing your best and giving the most information you can in that activity section, even though it's limited. Make sure you've made the most of the main essay. Make sure you've made the most of the supplemental essays if the college has them. Everything should complement one another. And then think about the recommenders you've asked and what they're likely to say about you. And then see if this additional information is also going to help your case. So good luck with your applications. Feel free to DM us with any questions.